Okay. Hi, I'm Erin Lucy, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking about everything that I read in the month of November. So I will start off with Jane Eyre. So I started the month with a classic, something that's been on my list for so long. Cannot believe it took me this long to get to Jane Eyre. This was one of my grandmother's favorite books, and she gifted this to me. There's like a little note in there from her, and I almost feel like that's kind of why I was putting it off a little bit for so long, just because she passed a couple years ago, and I feel like I really want to read it and have read it, but there's definitely some emotion there. So I finally got to it. Very excited I did. Perfect read for like November, December. Could even be January, I feel like. So basically, the story is about Jane Eyre, and she has a pretty troubled childhood. She grew up with her aunt and her cousins and not being treated very well. Very like loveless home towards her. So she ends up going and working as the governess to Mr. Rochester at Thornfield Hall, and he has like a ward, so she's like this ward's governess, and she begins to like uncover all sorts of interesting secrets and things. So yeah, it's kind of like about her life at different points, like both when she's a child, when she's a governess, and a couple other points in her life that she experiences. You kind of see her come into her own, and I love this so much. So I will say the first like quarter to a third of it, it was feeling really dry, and I wasn't sure. I was like not sure if I was gonna like it. I was intrigued, but kind of confused about the hype. However, it really started to pick up, and you really start to see Jane like come into herself, and she's such a fascinating character that is so like not romanticized, despite this being like a romance. She's not romanticized. There's like a sort of mundanity to her, but she's still very like obstinate and stubborn and like her own person. And I just thought she's such a great character, like that you don't see that often, that I don't even see that often now. And I love that. It just felt so much more real, relatable, and like, yeah, real. So that's just something I loved so much. And now like looking back on that first third of it, like you really understand why you have that part of it. And I think if I like reread it now, knowing like the whole story and Jane's whole journey, I would just like appreciate that so much more. So I ended up giving this 5 stars, despite what I thought in the beginning. I just like love this so much. I thought it was really interesting and kind of, yeah, different but real. And I totally understand why it's a classic. To me, it absolutely stands the test of time. I loved it. I'm going to be rereading this in the future for sure, probably often. I just think, yes, it's like now like almost like a gold standard for like character growth and just like, yeah, real characters that feel like super real, and like she still had so many struggles and things she had to face, but she like did it, and I don't know, just so good. I really loved it. I'll stop raving about it now. So then we had The English Understand Wool. And I had this as an ebook from the library, so I just screenshotted the cover. But this is a novella about this young girl who grows up with, I think her mom is French and her dad is English. And she grows up in this household where her mom is like, has these very refined tastes and like teaches her these things. It's very like this privileged background. They're very wealthy. She learns piano. They go to all these like different places for the holidays. She teaches her these like really like refined manners, and there's this emphasis on tailoring, hence the title, and like specific fabrics and where to get specific things made and stuff like that. Anyway, that's all very like background. So she's given this upbringing that is so fascinating, and the way the author talks about this, I don't know, I was just so hooked, despite this being about this like really super wealthy family and kind of like their background. But there's a twist in it that is really wild and really interesting that like affects this girl's entire life and her whole upbringing, and she kind of has to contend with that. yeah, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil it, but it is really good. I really like this. I think I ended up giving it about 4 stars. And I was just like really surprised. I feel like especially for a novella, like I read this in one sitting. I thought it was really good and highly recommend. So yeah, the English understandable. Okay, next was The Pumpkin Spice Café by Laurie Gilmore. And this is about Jeannie, whose aunt gives her her cafe in this small, adorable town, Dream Harbor. It's very quaint, very fall vibes. That whole side of it was great. Anyway, she gets to this cafe and is like hearing noises, things are spooky. It's not paranormal. It's definitely contemporary romance, but she meets this guy, Logan, who's a local farmer, and they kind of work together and have this romance. Not sure that was the best description / summary, but I will say for me, this one definitely did not live up to the hype. And I think the vibes, great. Fall vibes. I definitely don't regret reading this for that reason. And I should have anticipated this. I just struggle a lot with contemporary romance and I have a hard time finding things that I like. There's just a lot of tropes that are often used that I don't love. And yeah, I just like wasn't super wowed by the romance side of this. I thought the vibes, again, great. There's lots of pumpkins, fall events. That was cute. But I just felt like there was a lot of like plot holes-y things in like the plot and I wasn't super intrigued by it. Definitely just a personal thing. I think that it is definitely worth the read if you are into contemporary romance and particularly if you like fall vibes. Anyway, I won't talk too much more about it, but that is Pumpkin Spice Cafe, and this was one of my like in real life book club picks. So next is A Gentleman in Moscow, and this is Amor Towles' first book that I've read of his, and also can't believe it took me so long to get to any of his work. I really loved his writing. I thought he's a really excellent writer, and it's interesting. I ended up really liking this. Essentially, the premise of this book is, I believe it's early 1900s. So yeah, so 1922 is I think when it starts. And it spans a pretty long period of time. I'm trying to remember when it ends. Let's see. Oh, like the 1950s is when the afterword starts. Anyway, so it spans many years, but essentially in 1922, Count Alexander Rostov is arrested. Well, he's not arrested. He's sentenced to house arrest at this hotel, the Metropole Grand Hotel in Russia, and he like has to basically live out his life in this hotel. I feel like it sounds kind of like mundane, but I just like loved the writing so much that I think it just like really did it for me. It was just so interesting. There was the hotel, there was like Rostov's, relationships between different people. He developed some really like deep and interesting relationships with different people. I think one of them's like a movie star. There's also this like young girl that he ends up raising as his own daughter, and a lot of the book is about their relationship. And yeah, just like really great historical literary fiction. I just love this. It was definitely like a writing style thing for me. I just like loved it. I was so intrigued by everything. His descriptions of everything were so fantastic, and I just like ended up loving this so much. It was funny because Count Alexander Rostov, I've been on and off like reading War and Peace also, and I started to get really confused as I was like coming back to it and reading it the past couple of weeks, so starting kind of in November, and it was just so funny. I was getting like really confused because they use very similar names in War and Peace. So anyway, yeah, really love this. There is like a fun little twist, but I'm not going to say anything. So there's all sorts of cool, interesting intrigue, relationships, descriptions. So what I would recommend doing for this one is like reading a little bit and just seeing how you like the writing, because I feel like that was like a huge driver for me. It's just like I was so intrigued by that, and that really got me interested in the rest of it. So yes, A Gentleman in Moscow. We had Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything, which was my nonfiction TBR pick, and this is literally what the title says. It's a brief history of nearly everything. Everything in the sense of like a natural history mostly. Like this is not like a human history. I wasn't totally sure what it was going to cover, but a lot of like science, physics, chemistry, biology. I did tab a lot, and I thought it was really interesting. I will say this is a really big book, and there were definitely chapters in which I felt like I ended up getting the audiobook from Libby, and I think that really helped me push through a couple of chapters a lot, just because it's a lot of information, a lot of really detailed stuff, especially about like the people who discovered things, which is great. It just definitely got a little much at times for me. So you can kind of see there's like the cosmos, Lost in the Cosmos, like everything from the Big Bang, you know, Einstein, atoms, like all sorts of stuff, the planet, like early planet and the dangers of this planet, and then kind of through the evolution of life itself. And then the last part is like the road to humans. And I thought it was really great. Again, really interesting. I think it's a great overview. I just do think it's long and a little bit dry at some points. But I had also just read The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, and so that was like a really cool in tandem. This kind of like broadened that even more, so that was fun. Next we had Orbital by Samantha Harvey. So this just won the Booker Prize of 2024, and I had bought this when it first was longlisted because I was super intrigued, thought I would like it, and I was 100% right. It was so good. I think both this and A Gentleman in Moscow are going to make my top 10 favorite books of this year that I've read. Anyway, I'll talk a little bit about the premise for this one. This is also way more to me about like the writing and thoughts of these people. Essentially, there is this group of astronauts. I thought it was 6, but I am second guess. Yeah, six astronauts that are hurtling through space. So they're circling the Earth, and they're looking down on the Earth, and they like, it's just kind of their story of like looking down at the Earth and like thinking about and pondering life and their relationships to people down on Earth, as well as each other, as well as the Earth itself. It was just like that kind of thing is so me. I love that, you know, life's ponderings, and I just like, I ate this up. It was great. It's really short. Also read this in just about one sitting, tabbed it, and definitely at some point would love to reread this. So yeah, I definitely highly recommend, love this. I will say though, if you like plot and if you don't like things that don't have a plot, this is definitely not for you. It's very like not plot driven at all. So yeah, that was Orbital. And oh my gosh, yeah, I forgot about this. Okay, so we finally got around to reading the Atlas 6. Or should I say got back to reading it, because I have the copy from before it was traditionally published. So it's like a couple years ago. I read about half of it, and I don't know why. I ended up just like stopping halfway through and not continuing. And it wasn't like a hard to get enough. I knew I would come back to it because I'm really intrigued by the premise, and I definitely, it's not that I hated it. Like I definitely enjoyed it, was intrigued. I just like wasn't, I guess, fully immersed. So anyway, I came back to it, and I think this was smart. I ended up getting the audiobook on Libby as well. And I actually sort of like immersively read this one, which I think was really interesting because I was like listening to the traditionally published while I was reading this one. And I will say the traditionally published improved on a lot of things. A lot of like rooting ourselves in like the scenery and helping you visualize like where you are more and what's happening, and like taking you through things in a little more clear of a way. Because when I was reading this, I feel like it was just a lot of dialogue, and there's not a lot of like description, or I definitely didn't have very clear pictures of like where we were or what was happening when I was like originally reading this a couple years ago. So I thought that was a huge improvement. I'm already getting into things about it, but I will talk about the premise. Very like dark academia. Essentially, these 6 people are chosen from around the world to become these like apprentices. Yeah, they're like these apprentices to like this like initiation class that they have every year, and they choose like 6 people, but only 5 of them make it. I'm not gonna say too much more about that, but so you're following, and they're magicians, and they're essentially in this, what they're being initiated into is this like Alexandrian society. So it's essentially this like alternate like magical history of the Library of Alexandria and the like keeping of this knowledge. And each different character has magical powers, and they all have very different talents, and we see them using those talents in different ways. So it's a very character-driven story, I will say. And this is where it's like hard to even explain my feelings about this book without saying any spoilers, because I'll just give a very brief, like, I was struggling for like a lot of this book the first time I read it and even the second time. And I think it was just because like the characters that it really focused on, I had such a hard time feeling for. They were really manipulative, and I get that was like kind of part of it, but it just wasn't paying off for me. Like, I just like, I don't know, I was struggling with them a lot, and one particular character we just follow continually, and I just found her to be like, frankly, just annoying. I don't know. Anyway, that was just my perspective, and it may change. So this is, I believe, a trilogy, and the rest have come out since then. So Parisa is the one that I really struggled with. And just so many of the scenes and things are from her point of view, and I just don't understand. I don't know, don't sympathize a lot with like the allure. And I'm sure she has a backstory and there's like this whole thing about it, but I struggled a lot with her. And I felt like, so this is why it's like weird and conflicting in my feelings. I like really don't know how to feel about this book. I think this is a book I still haven't rated. I have no idea what I would rate this, because I struggled for most of the book, but then the ending, this is why I don't want to spoil, so I'm not gonna actually say anything, but like I loved the ending. It became so much more interesting, so much more like plot driven. I was so intrigued. But it was really bizarre to me because the characters that are like the main, like mainly involved in that like ending are not the ones that whose point of view you see the most from the beginning. And again, this may be like leading up because this is the first book. Maybe we get more of that later on, but it was just like really bizarre to me because I love that so much. And I think this could have been like a 5-star read for me if we had followed those characters maybe only from the beginning, because I think it just would have like made it so much stronger. And yeah, it just would have built up to this ending in like a really strong way, and we would have had such a better understanding of those characters and like their relationships to each other and to other characters. I'm trying to be vague so I don't like spoil anything, but still kind of explain how I felt about it. I have no idea if anyone else has ever felt like this, but truly I think one of the most conflicted books I've ever felt about. Like, I just don't, because of that, because I feel like I loved the ending so much and was so intrigued by like the magic and science and that side of it, and like a couple of the characters and their relationships, but then it focused on these other ones in the beginning that just was hard for me to like be fully on board with. Anyway, the Atlas 6. Definitely if you like dark academia, and I think if you like more character driven stuff, you might enjoy this because it is very character driven, and yeah, you definitely might like this. I will say, like, it's possible that because it's from so many points, like from all 6 characters, and you kind of hear from all of them, but there's a real imbalance in who you hear from. That's difficult. Like, maybe if it was like twice as long, maybe that's not the right choice, but then we could have heard from other characters more and really kind of developed that further, that character dynamic and group dynamic. Yeah, I'm like criticizing, but also not, because like I really like the end of it, and I will, because I like the end so much, I am gonna read the next one, because I feel like I need to know like how that, like if that, I don't know what that changes, and maybe we'll see more from the other characters. So yeah, that was Atlas 6. Then we had All the Light We Cannot See, which has been on my TBR for ages, and finally got around to reading this. This is a story of mostly 2 characters. There's Marie-Laure, and she lives with her father in this in Paris near the museum where he works, which is the Museum of Natural History. And in the meantime, Werner Fennig is this orphan who grew up in Germany, and he lives in this orphanage, but he's like really savvy with like radio stuff, and he's like constantly building radios, really smart kid. And essentially World War II starts to break out, and it's like what happens with both of these characters. So Werner gets recruited by the Nazis to create radio stuff for them and help them. And Marie-Laure, so her dad, it's a really interesting book because it's a lot about the history and about also like these individual characters and like the things that they go through. Character study, like really great and interesting to follow these characters and their struggles, their relationships. Was really fascinating. There is a connection that I won't spoil, but I thought that was really interesting. There's a lot of really interesting aspects of this, and you do kind of get thrown back and forth in time to a present event that's occurring in present, I think it's like 1945. And then you see kind of that buildup from like the late 30s throughout the war. And essentially Marie Laure and her father like escape on foot from Paris as it's being overtaken by Nazis, and they are escaping with this jewel. So this is the part that I really didn't realize this book was so much about, was like there's kind of this like weird like there's this weird like jewel side of this where like they're escaping with this like really like famous expensive jewel that has this whole like lore, backstory, mythology to it. And then the Nazi Germany, the people in that regime are trying to find it. So they escape to rural France with that. So that's All the Light We Cannot See. It's very much historical, again, historical literary fiction. I liked this. It wasn't a new favorite per se. It's really interesting reading this perspective, particularly Warner's perspective in Nazi Germany, and thinking about that. That was like really not sure how to feel about that side of it, but it is incredibly well written, has a lot of really interesting connections, and again, like really interesting character growth and struggles. So I have so many books this month, which was great. So the next was my reread for the month, and that was Inkheart, which I read as a kid, and honestly, I have like zero memory of the plot from this book, so I was really interested to reread it, and I did, and I feel a little bit conflicted because I feel like I had really great memories of this, even though I could not remember almost a single thing about it. I knew it was about books, and Maggie is this main character, Maggie and her dad, and they are kind of thrown on this adventure to do with this book Inkheart, where you have these characters. So her dad is able to like read from the book, and when he reads from the book, I think any book, like characters come out of the book. He doesn't have a lot of control over it, so that's part of the struggle here. So really interesting premise, interesting story. I like didn't remember, I would say, a good like chunk of it in the middle, and I was a little bummed to say that it didn't hold up for me quite as well as an adult. Not bad by any means. I just wasn't nearly as like excited and intrigued by it. It's probably just because I've read a lot of other things at this point, and this was definitely great as a kid, like middle grade. Definitely highly recommend, yeah, younger readers. But just for me, I was a little disappointed just from like my feelings as a kid. So yeah, that was Inkheart. Oh my gosh, I forgot I read this. Okay, so next was The Fellowship of the Ring, and I am so excited to finally read Lord of the Rings. It has been also on my TBR for a really long time. I read The Hobbit years and years ago, and this has been on there for a long time, and just for some reason have not gotten to it. And so this month I read The Fellowship of the Ring. I don't really feel like I need to explain this one, but it is just so good. I got these versions for my partner years ago because he's really into Lord of the Rings. And I will say, not my favorite to read from. They're really cute, but they're just so tiny, and it was fine. I also ended up having the audiobook that Andy Serkis reads from Everand, so I was able to kind of do both, and he's a great narrator. Highly recommend the audiobook, specifically read by him. But I also like to be able to see this one, especially there's things like songs and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just so good. Such a classic adventure. Absolutely lives up to the hype. And I think, especially having read the first one, they did such a good job with the movie. Like, they included so much. I liked the movies beforehand, but just in terms of like taking it from book to movie, I think they did a really good job. They included most everything. I will say the vibes feel a little bit different in the book. Like almost a little more lighthearted despite the topic. I don't know why, I kind of just felt that way reading it. But still, incredible job, both book and movie. I will say, this is towards the beginning, so I feel like this is not any sort of spoiler at all. But there's a whole Tom Bombadil scene in this that I had no idea existed because they don't include it in the movie. So that was the only kind of sad thing they left out of the movie, but I also understand how it was so long already and they couldn't. But just really fun scene to have, and it's not included in the movie. So yeah, The Fellowship of the Ring, and I will be reading the other two in the next couple of months. So next is Fang Fiction by Kate Stayman-London, and I'd seen this one a couple of places. It's been recommended by a couple of people whose opinions I trust. One is a real life friend, and then another was, I think, some bookish influencer recommended this one. And I have to say, I think this is one that I was also a little bit let down by. Could have been due, like, I just, like, for some reason really thought I would like this one. Essentially, I'm so bad with character names. Tess Rosenblum. She is a grad school dropout, and I will say major warnings for sexual assault in this. Read the trigger warnings. I won't talk much about it here, but that is, like, very much a huge plot point in this story. And I didn't really know that going into it, and I don't think it's necessarily done badly, but it's a lot more prominent a part of this narrative than I expected it to be. So Tess is a grad school dropout, and she has been working, I think, the last couple of years at this hotel in New York City, or in Brooklyn, and she also is a really big fan of these vampire books, Blood Feud, which are really popular. It's like the ACOTAR of this human world. Everyone loves, or Twilight, whatever, you know, like hugely popular. Her and her, like, best friend that she had met in grad school, who they're now a little bit estranged from, but they are, like, obsessed with these books and the characters in them. It's, like, very much a, like, vampire romance. So essentially what happens is she's working at this hotel, and one of the vampires from the book walks in and starts talking to her. And she found her and is talking to her because Tess had written this, like, BuzzFeed article about these books, and so she finds her because of that to, like, help her. So it's essentially one of those books where it's like the two worlds collide, right? So, like, those books are actually, like, real, essentially, and it's like this vampires have been, like, pushed by the rest of, like, the magical council or creatures onto this island so that they can't be of harm to any humans. And so that's why they're not really, like, seen regularly in recent years. Yeah, but, like, humans don't think they exist and don't think there's, like, the magical beings there. But Tess gets pulled in on this adventure to figure out what's going on, because, yes, these vampires are confined to this, like, weird, like, island space. So she goes there, she meets these characters from the novel, and in the novel, this is, like, really hard to say again also without spoilers, but it's really similar. So I also read Long Live Evil this year. To me, very similar situations in that it's, like, going into a novel. That's essentially what is, like, happening here. This has, like, a little more, like, real world threads, like, back and forth. And I will say this, compared to Long Live Evil, I think that you didn't need to know quite as much about the original books as I felt like you did in the last one, because it wasn't quite as plot driven, because the books in Blood Feud in this are mostly these, like, romances, you know, and, like, dalliances between characters. So it's not like she goes into an actual book. She just, like, goes into, like, the world where they are, but it's, like, real time, and these books are, like, in the past, essentially. So that part kind of worked pretty well. However, I just, like, felt like it was incredibly predictable to me, and I had a really hard time with the character decisions. Like, Tess wasn't necessarily, like, a bad character. I didn't necessarily have issues with her in the beginning, but she just, like, despite the fact that she knows all these things and knows how dangerous it is for her to be in this place, is making, like, the most dumb decisions I have ever seen someone make. And it just, like, drives me a little nuts when characters do that, especially when they're, like, you as a reader are made to believe that they know better and they should know better. I just found that to be, like, really hard. That was tough. Like, the believability there just, like, tanked, because I was like, what is going on? Why are we doing this? And, like, she would even say it beforehand and then still, like, run off by herself in this place. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know. I thought she was a little bit older and a little bit, I don't know, smarter in these decisions. But so that was one thing I struggled with. And the other thing is just like, again, these trigger warnings, because this is like hard to talk about, I think, because I don't want to discredit this in any way, but I did feel like I felt really conflicted about the fact that her character arc and her like whole growth as a character felt very rooted in like the sexual assault that she experienced. And I think like her overcoming that and like becoming her own person, great, but it just felt so revolving around that I really would have liked to see like her character more and like her be her and herself. I don't know, just some things just like didn't feel the greatest in that. And one thing that like I think could have really improved this for me, gosh, I feel bad, like I feel like I'm being negative. Overall, well written, and I like enjoyed the kind of like kitschy, like campy, fun, like vampire books and like real world books. I thought that was really fun. So I'm not like not recommending this. I just want to make sure people are aware, especially of this like trigger warning side of it, because I think that was just way more prevalent than I expected. And I think that one thing that could have helped a lot possibly is if this had been like twice as long, and maybe the author didn't want to do that, but if this was a lot longer, I feel like it maybe could have helped, because there maybe would have been more time to like develop characters and give a little bit more complexity to characters, their decision making, their relationships that they're developing. So that maybe would have helped me. But I definitely recognize, yeah, my own like biases in criticism in book reviewing. So again, I recommend just like read trigger warnings and definitely like consider kind of that before going into this. But yeah, if you don't take it too seriously, it's very cheesy and it's very fun, then I recommend. Anyway, I realized that that's actually my last book. 9, 10, 11 books. Yeah, I feel like I've been on a pretty great reading roll for me, and I definitely don't try to go for numbers. It's definitely not about the numbers for me. I just, I've been in this headspace of really feeling like I have so many things that I want to read. Again, not because I want to read X number of books, I just like, there's so many things that are out there to read, and it's like so exciting and kind of terrifying at the same time, because I feel like I just like don't have time to read them all. So I really have been on a roll this fall of like reading really consistently and trying to get through a lot of things. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future with my reading goals for next year. But yeah, that is everything I read in November. I would say overall a great reading month, a lot of diversity, a lot of different things. So I had a really good time. So yeah, love to hear what you've been reading lately, and thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.